Well, after decades, an uncensored copy of an anonymous letter sent to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has surfaced. It's now known that the FBI authored the notorious letter. In part, it says, quote, "No person can overcome facts, not even a fraud like yourself. Lend your sexually psychotic ear to the enclosure. You will find yourself in all your dirty filth, evil, and moronic talk exposed on the record for all time." Beverly Gage is an American history professor at Yale University, and she's the one who discovered this letter, this unredacted copy of this letter, and I spoke with her earlier. Dr. Gage, thanks so much for being here on Arise America. I want to just ask you, how did you find this unredacted copy of this letter to MLK? Were you looking for it, and why?
I'm writing a biography of J. Edgar Hoover, the former FBI director, and so I happened to be going through Hoover's official and confidential files at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, and those were sort of Hoover's secret files that he kept in his office, and so it was really happenstance that I found the letter in there. I knew that the letter existed, but I didn't expect to find this copy there, and I didn't really go hunting for it.
Yeah, I imagine it was quite a interesting discovery. I read the letter and was struck by a number of things. It's very inflammatory. I'm just wondering what your reaction to reading the letter was.
Yeah, it's really inflammatory. That's why it's a famous letter. So I had certainly heard about it. It had been public for 40 years, but we had only ever seen it in this heavily censored version before. And so reading it all in its totality, I think it's really even more shocking than we knew it was. It seems much more threatening, much more over the top, and really just the sum total of all of this language has a really different impact.
Yeah, indeed. And put this letter in context. Sort of briefly take us through the series of events that led to this letter being written, and we believe it was written by J. Edgar Hoover's deputy, William Sullivan. So walk us through the events that led to his writing this letter.
Well, so this letter went out in November of 1964, and I think there are a few important things to know about what led up to that moment. So first is that the FBI had been tracking Martin Luther King pretty heavily for about a year and some before this. They had been bugging his hotel rooms, wiretapping his phone. And so this was really in the context of a much more widespread campaign. 1964 came along. The civil rights movement had all sorts of triumphs that year. The Civil Rights Act was passed. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And in the middle of all of this, the FBI really escalated its campaign against King. So a few days before this letter was sent, Hoover held a press conference where he called King the most notorious liar in the country. And that got a lot of backlash in the press. But to kind of continue that operation against King, it was in that moment that they really hatched the sending of this letter.
So tell me, what do you believe J. Edgar Hoover, William Sullivan wanted to accomplish with this letter? It's been called the suicide letter, but there's this cryptic statement in there that says, "You know what to do." What do you think they were trying to accomplish?
Well, I think at the very least, they were trying to threaten King and sort of push him out of public life. Did they want him to reject the Nobel Prize and kind of announce that he was not worthy of leading the civil rights movement anymore? That's probably the most benign interpretation you could have of the letter. But certainly King himself and many of his associates understood it as an attempt to get him to kill himself, as you said.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that the press didn't jump all over this, and that just is an indication of how different the world is today, because it'd be all over social media to live on forever. But the FBI leaked many of these details to the press, and it really didn't get traction.
Right. So they had these wiretaps. They were pretty well aware of, the broader story of King's extramarital affairs. They went to reporters and tried to say, hey, have we got a scoop for you? And they really didn't want to print it. And I think it was a different press culture at the time. They also didn't print, say, John Kennedy's extramarital affairs in pretty much the same moment. And I also think that a lot of reporters were aware that this wasn't just kind of exposure of a public official. This was really an attempt to take down an individual and to, in many ways, to destroy the whole movement.
I'm coming to the end of my time with you, but I want to ask you two things. First of all, that is, do you, tell us how Dr. King responded to this letter, if at all?
Well, he never really responded publicly. And in fact, we didn't know about the letter until the mid-70s. So this was well after Dr. King himself had been killed. It was after J. Edgar Hoover was dead. And it sort of came out in these exposés of the FBI. So he didn't say anything publicly, but I think internally he talked with many associates, and he was pretty alarmed by it. And a lot of people have tried to puzzle out, did this change the way that he behaved? Did it make him more cautious in some way? And that's not totally clear.
Yeah, and speaking of caution, and I just have a few seconds left, what is today's cautionary tale from this letter?
I think it's a really good example of the ways in which an intelligence agency having a lot of access to private details can actually lead to some pretty dangerous activities under the wrong circumstances.
Yeah, indeed. It is fascinating. Dr. Beverly Gage, thank you so much.
Thank you.